So today, as you can tell from the title, I have my very first guest on Nish Commentary. Welcome, Jordan. Do you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Jordan or Jae. I am an Eastern Cherokee Black freedman. I'm not enrolled. I'm one of those people that is reconnecting. So I'm pretty glad to be on here to talk about my experience with that, but also with, Blackness and Indigeneity.
Yeah. So if you are a new viewer or a returning viewer, whichever, Nish Commentary is just a series on my channel that I like to do, just talking about different topics in Indian country. And I am welcoming my very first guest, as I just said. Sorry, I'm a little nervous. This will be the first time that I've invited somebody, so I don't have kind of like an organized way that we're going to do this. But basically, we're just going to start spitting out facts at everybody.
Well, also, I think that it's like we were just talking about it before we started recording, is that how it's kind of timely because of the things going on with Rebecca Roanhorse right now.
Mhm.
And for those of you who maybe are not familiar with Indian country, you might know her because she's a science fiction and fantasy writer who is very, very well known and has written many, many acclaimed books and short stories and has started writing Star Wars as well. So lots of people know her outside of the context of Indian country. So um, the whole this whole thing is like a giant hot mess. A giant hot
Yeah.
mess.
Yeah. Um, Gosh, I don't. Okay. So I will
Interesting.
admit, like, I've heard of her before, but I never really interacted with her much on Twitter or knew anything about her books, really.
Mhm.
So when I logged onto that Twitter that day and I just seen so many people on my timeline that were like, that Indians.com article,
Yeah.
Rebecca Roanhorse, anti-blackness, and I'm like, what happened? So
Yeah.
basically, somebody that writes for Indians.com tried to discredit her indigeneity, right?
Yep. They called
Basically,
her Elizabeth Warren
the
of
Elizabeth.
science, which, by the way, for those of you who don't know, what's really offensive about that is Elizabeth Warren is a white woman who co opted Cherokee identities to give herself a platform.
Mhm.
Whether or not you agree as a Dene person with how Rebecca Roanhorse wrote Trail of Lightning, without being married and accepted by her Dene community through her Dene husband and children, she's still Native. She
Right.
was adopted out. And Elizabeth Warren has zero ties to the community. That's a completely different thing to say about somebody. Um,
Yeah.
Saying I, as a Dene person, am writing an open letter because I didn't like blah, 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 is different than saying someone who is Native isn't Native. And that stuff really only happens to Black Natives because, as you and I know, white pretendians walk into our community and do stuff all the time.
All the time. And they're
And
accepted immediately, no questions.
right. And people who are white passing and got adopted out, they're welcome back in a lot easier. And to me, um, this is obviously anti-blackness because the person who wrote the article would pass a paper bag test. And frankly, to be honest with you, if you're not as dark as the person that you're accusing, you should probably leave them alone, especially in
Mhm.
Indian country. Because a lot of these academic white passers really, really use their privilege to be Indianer than other people. And the fact of the matter is, and I'm not going to name names or ats or whatever, is a lot of these people are reconnectors as well, who woke up one day and decided that they were going to co-opt Resi identities and pretend like they've been on the low the whole time, and they haven't been. And that
Mhm.
pisses me off because I'm also a reconnector, and I know that this is going to be like a lifelong journey that's going to be really difficult for me, predominantly because I'm a freedman descendant, and also because that's the right way to do it.
Right. And as somebody like I grew up on the res, I am connected. I have always been. But something that's been brought to my attention is that people like me, or like the people that have been criticizing Roanhorse, they need to be careful with how they criticize reconnecting people, especially Black reconnecting people, because they can quickly discredit people who are legitimately Indigenous and, you know, push them away from trying to carry on our cultures that we're trying so hard to preserve.
Yeah. And anti-Blackness is so particularly a symptom of colonialism above all other things. A lot of people who originally were parts of ethnic groups that weren't considered white when they first immigrated here achieved whiteness via the oppression of Black and Native peoples. And that and anti-Blackness is still the route by which many people use um, just a concept that's so ingrained in our country that they can use it as a step to get to achieve whiteness, because whiteness here is a property title. Whiteness is not a culture. Nobody comes from actual white people Blanco land. Like, if I could find that place, I would be really grateful to tell y'all where exactly to go back to.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact of the matter is I don't have a problem with people being proud to be Italian or being proud to be French or Croatian, because those are real cultures. All of my white ethnic background comes from Italy. I'm only 2 generations away. Lots of my family, their first language was Italian. I'm very proud of that part of my identity. But I do recognize how Italians achieved the property title of whiteness, and that was via anti-Blackness.
Right. Same way with the Irish folk too, which is where my white background comes from.
Right, and you have that acknowledgement that whiteness is based in capitalism, and
Yeah.
capitalism in this country is based upon slavery, and therefore, if you want to be white, you have to be anti-Black.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Basically.
and a lot of these academic people who write these types of articles are white. Sorry, but if you lived your whole life as a white person and you didn't find out that you were Native until you were in college, you grew up endowed with all that privilege and all the entire world recognizing you and only seeing you as a white person. So you have the white person's attitude. So when you
Mm-hmm.
go to reconnect, you can't come at me the same way that I have to, because I was already Indigenous, you know?
Yeah.
Um, I grew up in a very Pan African community. I was telling you a little bit earlier, but I didn't know that I was a Black freedman until I was about 19. We had always had like blood myth stories that ran through our family, and I just never took them seriously because I thought, even as a kid, that that sounded a little bit disrespectful. You know, I was just like, well, we don't really know what it is or have any proof, so I'm not going to pretend to be a different kind of person.
Yeah.
Um, But I also grew up in a very pro Black household, so I never felt the need to co opt another identity to make me feel more special. When I found out that my family is freedman descendants, the reconnection is because my family is important to me and my history is important to me. And this is who we are as people. And we were literally disenfranchised and pushed away from our tribe because of anti Blackness. So,
Right.
like, that is what it is. Like,
And it's
I
no
think,
fault of your own either, because I remember researching into um, how like the Cherokees would take their census and like the rolls, and
mhm,
they did like the paper bag test, and people who were mixed, they would have, say, one full-blood Native parent and one full-blood Black parent, because they were phenotypically Black, they
mhm.
were written down as not being Native,
Yeah.
despite the fact that they literally are.
Yeah, I one of my uncles, part of what happens during historical traumas like that is that it shapes people and it makes them really different, and it changes them for like generations. And I didn't really actualize that until I started putting things together with my own family line. Like, my great grandfather had so many kids, from 14 to 15 kids, of the ages now. My
Wow.
grandfather, who is the oldest, who is 70, to his youngest, my aunt and uncle, Marcia and Eliza, who are 28. I'm 26.
Wow.
Um, so one of my uncles who I was really close to when I was younger told me, he's like, when I was younger, my dad told me the story about his dad looking at him and saying, "You were born to the wrong tribe," because his skin was too dark. And
Mm.
my great grandfather was the only child out of 13 that survived. So the only child out of 13 to survive, and because he didn't look the type of Indian you wanted him to, because
Mhm.
you knew your wife was black when you had children with her, because his mom was also a black freedman. She just was
Mhm.
light skinned. So I think that he thought that he couldn't possibly have a dark skinned, black coated child. And guess what? Black people make other black people. So that's what's going to happen sometimes.
Right, genetics, they happen, man. My
And
sister, you wouldn't believe it. She's pale skin, red hair, because my grandmother's Irish genes skipped all the native ones and hit
right,
her.
my mom is black, and I have a sister with blonde hair and green eyes. And then I have another sister who has completely different facial features from me because she got really Mediterranean facial features. Genetics be weird. But
Mhm.
this concept that you're allowed to call yourself native based upon what you look like is one that white passing natives complain a lot about, but for some reason don't actualize how that's actually used to really oppress people. But you
Mhm.
see, that's how privilege works, is you can be a crybaby about something, but then when someone actually says, "It's costing us our tribal and land rights, we're not being allowed to learn about our cultures," they're like, "Someone once said I didn't look native in a grocery store."
Mhm. Yeah.
And then they where I have like zero empathy. I just
Mhm.
don't. It's like the same thing as when other light skinned black people complain about being made fun of. Okay, you can go see a therapist about your feelings. Dark skinned black women not find jobs and housing any easier.
Mhm.
That's
Right.
how privilege works. Is sometimes things are not about my personal feels. A lot of things aren't. And it's like, it's okay. It's like really okay. And for this Rebecca Roanhorse thing, I feel like a lot of it is straight up jealousy. You know?
Because she's being a successful novelist and
Yeah,
they have to write about her
yeah. She
to do any
has
writing.
and really talented and recognized, but she just had the audacity to be black.
And that whole article wasn't even, so they claim the reason that they're mad at her is because she apparently didn't show up to an important event at the tribe that she's from. Okay, so
Hmm.
that's one reason. And then the other reason was because she apparently mishandled Danae information with one of her books. But they only touched on those two, like just a little bit, and the rest of the article was just trying to discredit her. Like, well, this thing that she did is kind of weird, so she might not be native. That's the
Yeah,
vibe I got.
here's the thing: is that there were folks who had issues with with things that she did in her first book, and then she consulted other Danae people. You know,
Right.
and there have been her proxy readers who are Danae and parts of her community who have stepped up and said, "Yo, we talked about this. It's good. She's been held accountable." But for some people, that's not good enough. Because accountability to them is being able to drag and hurt people, not actually watch them improve or learn.
Mm-hmm.
And that is also a huge symptom of misogyny. You know, Black women are not allowed to learn. We're not allowed to change, and we're not allowed to defend ourselves without being called aggressive, without being called savages, without X, Y, and Z, all these things that people want to call us and not include us for, but then co-opt all the shit that we make,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Yeah.
And that's why I'll call a spade, because lots of people who are involved in Indians.com have repeatedly shown themselves to be anti-black. And they, during this piece, were going around into people's DMs on Twitter trying to find other people to slander this woman. And all she did was write some really good books.
I heard about that too. They were trying to do research on her. Like, do you know anything about her? If she's really Pueblo? I think it's Pueblo, one of the Pueblo
Yeah,
tribes. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. It's just, to me, it's so obvious that it's really frustrating, but of course, it's not to them. Because as soon as you address this issue, white passing natives go, oh, you're saying I'm less native than you. No, I'm not. I'm saying that the way that you view your oppression is, one, very much in your favor for somebody who looks just like the oppressor. And two, if you can get this very basic concept of that people might discriminate against you a little bit sometimes because you're native, then you might be able to get how those of us walking around racialized all the time feel. But they don't want
Mm-hmm.
to, because that's the amount of cognitive dissonance that people who want to be the biggest victim in the world don't want to have, you know?
That's the
And
perfect word for that, I think. Cognitive
yeah,
dissonance. It makes them uncomfortable. They don't want to feel like, okay, they might have it worse than me.
yeah. Or they don't want to have to adjust how maybe the things and the actions that they've taken have affected people and harmed them. You know, when I was growing up, I knew what colorism was, but I never really fully like actualized how that played out and how, as a kid, I might have perpetuated it. And looking back, like there were definitely times as a kid where I thought I had it worse because I was mixed and nobody could understand me, you know, but that was ridiculous. And like there's a lot of privileges that I don't have. I've never been white passing. I've never had anybody run up to me and be like, "You're Irish, right?" Like it's pretty obvious that I'm an
Mm-hmm.
ethnic person. Generally people can't figure it out. I've been called every name in the book. It's really pretty funny for me at this point. But I just like I was able to take a look as a very young person and go, "Okay, so I'm brown. But when I'm in a place with people who are blacker than me, those are the people who get rude shit said to them."
Mm-hmm.
And when people talk about what's pretty, they're not talking about a lot of the aunties I grew up loving, a lot of my
Mm-hmm.
cousins. They're not talking about those women. They're not talking about those people. They're talking about people who look like me because I am more digestible when it comes to blackness. Um,
Mm-hmm.
as my features are seen as being further away from the scary kind of blackness. And then I was like, oh, that's a privilege. And it didn't make me feel bad because I didn't do it. But what I can do is pay attention and make sure that other people around me aren't treated like shit. And then I don't treat other people like shit because of it. It's that easy. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
it comes from a place of love. And these people who wrote this slam article talk about loving natives and loving their community, but they can't even do the work on themselves to reflect on how maybe they're being toxic to their community. And that's a
Mm-hmm.
problem for me because I hold myself accountable like to way higher standards than anybody else does, but that's just because I was raised to not show my ass in public. So before I even knew I was native, like black people already have this concept of just minding your business and being well behaved because we have respect for other people, you know? So it
Mm-hmm.
was really not that hard for me to not be out here writing slam
Disrespecting
about
and being an ass,
it.
basically.
For real. It's super easy. Like generally, if I go off on somebody, it's because they done provoked me multiple times, you know? But Rebecca can't even defend herself. Because anything she would say would either prove it or she'd be called aggressive for it. So, like, here we are, like, talking between ourselves about a woman who should be allowed to stand up and talk for herself, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But, like, what is she going to be able to say that, like, Indian country isn't going to accuse her of being not traditional enough or accuse her of being too aggressive and, like, find more reasons, you know? Because they were already looking for reasons, and the biggest one was she's black.
Right.
I don't know how else to say that this is like a huge problem, like a really hugely ingrained problem.
I don't
That,
know how else to say it either because it's just like, it's obvious.
yeah.
To
And I
me,
think that,
anyway.
yeah. Well, I think that it's because, and here's the thing that I've been learning while reconnecting is a lot of people, when they're reconnecting, want to be Indianer than everybody.
Oh, yeah.
And they approach this a lot of times with ego. and with, well, what do I get now that I've found this out? And so it becomes a competition. And that's why, like, a lot of these things are written by white passing academic natives, you know? I
Mhm.
haven't really seen anybody who is not overly educated out here writing slam pieces on each other, like you we take that to Facebook.
Facebook is Indians.com, apparently.
Yeah.
Um,
Also,
it-
mostly I'm just really, really embarrassed for native journalists right now. Like,
yeah,
really embarrassed. Because
I've been embarrassed before this piece, even.
the Elizabeth Warren of science fiction,
Why Warren?
because Elizabeth Warren is obviously, she ran for president, but she appropriated Cherokee identity in order to build herself a platform, and she used our identity as Cherokee people, as many white people in Oklahoma, as many white people do, in order to add a little spice to her white, basically. She was tired of being flavorless.
Yeah.
But the thing is like, even as a freedman, I can find where my family is listed on the Dawes rolls. Cherokee people have the longest running English based syllabic of any of the other nations. And I'm not going to say the first written language, because we did have written languages in recording. They just did not reflect Europeans, and therefore they did not see them as counting. So I'm not
Mhm.
going to say that wampum, which is the way that my people traditionally kept the histories and the laws, doesn't count as a language, because it does. And I'm not going to say that the way that people use quill work and bead work and painting their lodges and homes isn't a language, because it is a language. That's just like, across the world, all indigenous languages, if they don't immediately resemble a certain syllabic, they're considered not languages. So that's a big pet peeve of mine. We did have languages, but the Cherokee Nation is the first people who translated that in a way that could correspond to English.
Mhm.
So um, that's like, the five civilized tribes notion is like a big part of anti-blackness in the Native community too. But my problem with, to sink back in, is my problem with calling a black woman Elizabeth Warren is Elizabeth Warren has no ties to Indian country at all. None. Zero. Zip. Zilch. She's a pretendian. Rebecca Roanhorse, with or without her Dene family, with or without being married to a Dene man and having Dene children and being accepted as a Dene person by the Dene community, as she is, she's still Pueblo. She was adopted out. That still makes her native.
Right.
You've erased her native identity, and that shit's anti blackness. You've decided that she doesn't get to sit at the table with you because she didn't wear the right skin color today. And that's ugly. That's just ugly. And
Mhm.
embarrassing. So embarrassing. They were pulling together all of these things to try to prove that she was a pretendian when she literally has legal documentations and her mother. You know?
Right.
Like, those people
At
need to,
the
like,
same time, like, okay, everybody in Indian country, we're all so like we were ill treated. We
right.
we shout that out into the mountains. Listen to us. We were maltreated. Our children were sent to these schools. They were murdered. They were adopted out. There were laws that were passed because our children would be overwhelmingly adopted out. But this one case where somebody was disconnected from their tribe, that's invalid. She must be a Warren.
Right. And that sounds pretty anti black to me. I don't know. If the boot fits, I'm going to probably lace it up. But,
Right.
um, and I'm not going to try to talk personal shit. We can run our mouths about this later. But a lot of the people who are affiliated with that, I've already had problems with, just on Twitter,
Mhm.
just saying anti-black stuff, and me being blocked because I'd be like, yo, that's inherently anti-black. Or like, why have you run this super famous podcast for 2 years and you come from one of the five civilized tribes, but you ain't had a black native on yet? you know?
Mhm.
For me, asking questions to people who come from nations with high populations of Black natives, and yet never speaking to them, apparently I'm the asshole. You know what I mean? But I pay attention to that because the thing about privileges is you use that platform to raise all your people up. We are only as strong as we allow our most vulnerable to be. And these people are stepping on our most vulnerable to lift themselves up, which is intrinsically against the way that our cultures work, anyways.
Mhm. It's colonial.
So you
Super
want to talk about
colonial.
who's Indianer than who? I don't give a goddamn if you're carrying a card with your name on it and I'm not. Because right now, you're acting like a settler bitch. Point blank. You
Yeah.
get it on your, have your ID, have everybody know you at powwow, and still act like a settler bitch. And I'm going to tell you to your face. Sorry.
Mhm.
Like, I don't have to be nice about that. You're perpetuating violence in our communities and the ostracization and the keeping of traditions. You know, how many Black Native people, if we were not colonized here, would have sacred places within our societies the way that they're supposed to? How many of our people have callings from their ancestors that they've never been able to make it to because anti-blackness has thrown something in their way? And I'm not even an overly spiritual person. I don't really think that being any type of medicine person is really there for me. But I can
Mhm.
imagine that there are many Black Native people who have been called who do not get to meet their potential simply because of our internalized bigotry within our communities. And that, or like learning our language and not having access to learning our traditions. Like, if 70% of us are urban, that means a lot more of us are going to be Black. You know, how many of your
Mhm.
people are you losing and ostracizing all because you let the cop in your brain tell you how to treat Black people in your own community?
And then complain that your culture is dying when you're not allowing it to thrive because
Right.
of bigotry.
It's true. And I think that and the problem is because it comes from this severe lack of understanding of what indigeneity is. Um, because Black people are indigenous. I've talked about this a lot on my Twitter. We were forcibly removed from Africa.
Mhm.
I don't think that anybody who was over living on the Ivory Coast before it was the Ivory Coast, chilling in the tropics. I've heard Accra is great. I've heard Ghana is beautiful. I've heard the weather is lovely. I don't think anybody was out there chilling in a tropical paradise and like, yeah, rainy Virginia and slavery is exactly where I'd like to go. Sounds lit. I'd love to be on a boat, you know?
Yeah.
Doom.
What are the beaches like?
Right. The rocky beaches as opposed to these perfectly unoppressed beaches where all the people speak my language and I'm treated like a human being. Yeah.
Mhm.
People didn't leave for fun. And a lot of Native people oftentimes accuse Black folks of being settlers. Being a
Oh.
colonizer is a choice. There's a really big difference between genocide and being forced to have to have yourself bodily removed from your people. And it was beyond that. Slavers would separate people who spoke the same language so that when they were sold to plantations, they could not work together in order to overthrow their oppressor. The like destroying Black people's sense of identity, attachment to their language and to their tribes was very purposeful in order to enslave us here. Because if you don't know where you can go back to, how can you escape? You know?
Mhm.
And that is done across the world in order to perpetuate lateral violence. Is to take one population of people from like a place that they're not at and place them in conflict with another group of indigenous people so that you can, during the chaos, exploit the resources and exploit those people. And therefore, total indigenous unity, which includes Palestinians and Black people and Native people from Central and South America and from the Arctic and Indigenous people in Finland. Like, Indigeny is global and it has been attacked globally. England
Mm-hmm.
colonized 3/4 of the world. We are not the only people who are facing this, and we need to actualize that Indigeny is bigger than North America. Because, one, that removes a lot of the ego behind being an Indigenous person. Because oftentimes people do feel like they're special. And that's very counterintuitive to communal movements. And I know that this, like, I studied Zen Buddhism for a long time. I went to school and studied philosophy. So, like, the idea of defeating my sense of self and my ego in order to benefit people at large was a really big consideration that I have. I don't know if other people think about it that way, but that's how I think about it. Is I think about it in terms of what does Indigeny look like globally? How has it been attacked, and intact globally? And what does it look like, and how does that reflect upon us here? Um, because I recognize that as a Black and Native person, as a Black Native, I have a lot in common with Palestinian people and other Arab people who are currently being invaded and hurt by U.S. imperialism.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I've had to have discussions with Palestinians who also have internalized anti-Black. And it comes oftentimes from a misunderstanding of Black culture, how Black culture is promoted in the media, and a lot of things. It just, anti-Blackness is global and it's a big problem. But I think that it inherently stems from the fact that we want to forget that Black people themselves are Indigenous, and that there are Afro-Indigenous groups that are indigenous to the American continents. You know,
And
I
everything that we know is based on the fact that the dominant group is the one that controls the ideological power. I know we said no academic terms, but I don't know what else to say for that one. Ideological power, the dominant group, they control what is taught, what is passed down,
right,
what messages derive from, like you said, media and things like that. And
yeah,
I feel like that has a large impact on how people developed these ideas,
right. And
basically.
I think that I hate to say this, I really do hate to say this, but I feel like a lot of mixed white Native people have some dances with wolves syndrome.
What's that? What do you
It's
mean
just
by
feels
that?
like too sacred.
Oh, okay. I wear a
You
ribbon skirt to the grocery store, kind of.
know, hmm
Super.
it's like it's too much and it's corny as fuck to me. But it's also because without learning that I'm Native, I would have always been a person of color, so I don't have to pretend to be oppressed because I was already dealing with that from birth, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes people who are privileged, like, want to be hurt so bad, you know? And
Yeah,
I'm
I
not,
think of that. I think it's a Squidward meme where he's
yeah.
like, spare oppression, please.
It's like they want to be followed around by the world's tiniest violin. Like, someone didn't recognize that I was Native because I have green eyes and completely white features in a grocery store. Yeah, dude, that's
Mhm.
because people who are coded as white are treated as white people.
Right. And it wasn't always that way. People who were
Right,
redheaded, they'd be like, there's that Irish, and they
right,
were treated badly. But again, they rose up through anti-blackness. They worked along with the black people and then formed unions where they wouldn't allow them in. They
yep.
kicked black people down so that they could rise up and join this sort of idea of whiteness so they could benefit from it.
And it's very much the correct amount of caramel natives who act like this. People who are just like a tiny bit brown, you know, like enough in the sun so that when they take pictures on Instagram with braids, they could be like, I look like my grandma today. And I like really hate to make fun of other mixed people like this, because I too am mixed with white. I just don't think that I'm special because of it, you know? And
Mm-hmm.
so it's really quite ridiculous to me to see people who could be using their privilege to really help people like me, other Black Native, to literally not have to be doubled down on with oppression, because it really sucks that we don't have any space where we can just breathe and be regular people unless it's with other Black natives. And like, if we're only 2% of the population and then even less of us are Black natives, that's like 7 of us. Like, what are we gonna do? You know, I'm
Mhm.
literally just like out here asking for people to listen and not quote or speak over Black freedmen when I exist here and can speak for myself, and to not, and to like think twice when they accuse Black women of cultural appropriation, and how they come out, the gate aggressive and vicious and mean towards Black women who appropriate, versus more willingness and softness towards white women. You
Mhm.
know, I want people to think about their actions in regards to how we reply to each other. Because even as a Black person, I have internalized anti Blackness. You know, colorism is
Mhm.
real. It's
Right.
real in the community, and it's real in the Native community. And if I didn't
Mhm.
understand how that affected me, I could be out here showing my ass, being really shitty to other women who are more like me than they're different than me. Because I was also taught to speak down to and treat darker skinned Black women like shit.
Mhm.
Everybody was. That's how our society is.
And I
You
think that
really,
a big reason that people aren't so willing to truly understand colorism, racism, all the isms, and their involvement with it is because they think, okay, colorism must mean that I have to consciously dislike somebody because they are deeper than I am. When really
yeah.
it could be just like the smallest little interactions that can do harm.
Well, it's like there's so many people who will literally say there aren't Black natives, but will acknowledge mixed white natives. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And what I like to tell people is, one thing that I'm very grateful for is growing up in a Pan African community. My mom has a degree in Pan African Studies and lived in Ghana and studied at Con there. And so I grew up around people who were from the Caribbean and from West Africa, and just Black people from all over the diaspora. And so I was introduced to the concepts of colorism very young. And while it took me a long time to understand it, when I did understand it and how it was a privilege, period, point blank, lighter skinned people benefit from colorism. It works on a spectrum, so please don't come at me with all these, because I know people want to come at my social media and always try to be like, but what if the sun was in the 5th house in the sky with the stars, and on the Tuesday I was standing next to these bags? Stop it.
Mm-hmm.
Stop it. Stop it. Some things are just not
Mm-hmm.
about you. But
But
like,
people they know I'm native, so
right. And it's just, when I started trying to reconnect to the Native community and to being Cherokee, I realized that I was kind of in a good place to be really in the middle of explaining this concept to people, because I have a lot of privilege amongst other Black people, but I'm not very light skinned for a lot of other Cherokee people. And so being able to see that dichotomy and how that affects me personally also makes me more reflective of how I treat other Black people around me,
mm-hmm.
and what my privileges mean to my community as a Black person, and how I can use that to protect them rather than oppress them. And I'm pretty sure that if I can do it, anybody can.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Everybody's gonna have like a bajillion excuses. Well, blah 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 said blah 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 to me, and once somebody hurt my feelings. Lots of people have hurt my feelings. Lots of people have physically harmed me for being a racialized person. For
Mm-hmm.
no other reason other than being a racialized person in public. So go on ahead and cry. Because there's
Right.
people out are dying because we had the audacity to look a little different. So I
And you
don't
can't believe in racism but not colorism. You can't.
exactly. And only people who again want to play the oppression Olympics only to their benefit use that. I was so glad to learn about Kimberly Crenshaw's theory of intersectionalism because it made it a lot easier to describe what it's like to be a black freedman and to grow up the way that I have.
Mm-hmm.
But other people just use it to create another hierarchy. And in Indian country, that has definitely been used to say we have it worse than black people rather than we have it congruent with black people. You
What
know?
about natives? Yeah.
Yeah. What about natives? It's not our fault, that
Mm-hmm.
we are always being shown as being violent, rioting, and murdering people, and then nobody's talking about you. Because trust us, we don't want to be in the news only for all the bad shit that people get to demonize us for. To think that we have any control in how the colonizer presents us is silly.
Right.
You know, it's super duper silly. It doesn't even make sense. If you know that the government suppresses information, then why would you think that we should allow white people to dictate how we intercommunally interact with one another? You shouldn't.
Mm-hmm.
Because growing
Yeah.
up, I never heard any black people disrespect native people. Never. I've
I
been around all
can't.
types.
Right. Yeah.
I've heard some hoteps say some off the wall anti scientific stuff, but we don't talk to them anyways. Like, everybody knows that they're the weirdo. So that's not the popular opinion. I know
Mm-hmm.
that there are people who also try to use black freedmen against natives who had nothing to do with the five civilized tribes. And I always come at them too, because you need to keep freedmen out your mouth if you're not a freedman. You
Mm-hmm.
know, you don't get to quote and talk about us as a non native black person, even if you're not from the diaspora, because I don't let non black people speak over black people. And I don't let native people get spoken over by non native people. So you're sure as hell not going to tell me what it's like to be me, especially because I'm right here, you
Right.
know? And that is the problem with lateral violence, is we have the ability to reinforce these constructs that were not built for us but on top of us, and we don't realize how we're doing it to one another.
Mm-hmm.
And it took me a long time to get there too. It takes a lot of meditation and reflection, and also sometimes just being embarrassed.
Right. I have this
And I
friend, her name's Miracle. She's another YouTuber and she's a black woman. Um, and something that she taught me, which I really love to use this quote of hers. She might be watching. Hi, Miracle. She says, if you go up on that hill, people that say you're going to die on this hill, you're going to die on that hill that you created for yourself. If you go up on that hill, you don't have to die on it. You can come back down and learn and do better. It's
right,
okay to realize, well, oh shit, something that I did was wrong. Reflect on that and be embarrassed about it. But as long as you move forward from that point, then you've ended that cycle for yourself.
yeah,
You won't end up being the thing that you're constantly fighting against, being an activist against and for.
and that's the hardest part of the work, I think, is a lot of us think that because we do and say all these external things that we don't need to reflect on them internally. And especially once I got out of college, I took a step back from doing a lot of public organizing things. One, because my mental health tanked out. Like, black and native women do not have access to healthcare. We don't. I've been struggling with an eating disorder on and off my whole life. It's pretty much always whooped my ass because people don't believe that I'm capable of having an eating disorder because I'm brown.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is the thinnest I've been in years. And that's another thing, is that, like, people are demanding a lot of labor out of a group of people who are always doing constant labor. This is stressful. I'm not out here telling people that anti-blackness is wrong and that anti-nativeness is wrong and that lateral violence has me fucked up because it's fun. you know? I'm doing it because I see the way that y'all treat your children. And because one of these days, one of them kids might have black kids, or one of them kids might be a little darker skinned than you thought that they were going to be.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that we perpetuate trauma is not realizing the trauma within ourselves. And we talk about this concept of preparing for 7 generations. Well, how can you prepare for 7 generations if you haven't thought about how the ones before you have made you you too? And I think that one of the blessings of being raised in a Pan-African community, in an Afrocentric community, is that I was always told that you stand on your shoulders, on the shoulders of your ancestors. They are the people that lift you up and build you. But also, that means you need to recognize that there have been cracks in your foundation put there by other people.
Mm.
This is not just work that you wake up one day and you say it's done. You know, it's going
Right.
to come it's going to be, if I decide to have kids, it's going to be every day that I have kids, making sure that I don't say color or shit to them, you know,
Mm-hmm.
or making sure that I don't accidentally endorse pan nativeness and not realize it. It's going to be defeating some of the really internally toxic, misogynistic ideas that I hold myself to, because we have grown up in a misogynistic society and I still sometimes govern myself by those rules.
Right.
It's going to be a lot of things. And my problem with the wokeness Olympics is that people think that they can stop one day. And there is no stopping.
No.
Just like with me connecting, there is no stopping. There's not going to be one day where I wake up a totally different Jordan who didn't grow up half her life not knowing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to grow up one day without having a great grandfather who was told that because he was born too dark skinned, he was born to the wrong tribe. You know? Those are part of me, and so is reconnecting. So I cannot pretend to be anything else. And I think that that comes from a lot of self-enforced confidence, because a lot of people think that seeing the cracks in their foundation makes them weaker. When really, you really got to repair yourself before you think you can go out into the world and be telling everybody else about who makes who what.
Acknowledging those cracks makes
Yeah.
you stronger. Just bouncing
Yeah.
off your weaker comment, and in turn, vocalizing that acknowledgement teaches others to do that, and it can ripple into more people understanding, you know, their own cracks and how they interact with others, and just ripples into a more balanced society. I think if we can all just get there.
Yeah, well, because it is, people make a culture, and therefore if there is a schism within ourselves, something ugly that we've internalized, then that becomes part of the culture too. And I think that people have a really hard time recognizing the responsibility of the individual to the whole. You know, we oftentimes talk about how the rugged individualism of the United States contributes to capitalism and therefore the oppression of everybody, but we don't always talk about what that does to our minds, you know, how that
Mhm.
makes us think that saying certain things about people is okay, or it's a lot. There's so many things that you have to break down in, honestly, the ongoing fist fight against colonialism. And so, like, as somebody who is both mixed, so that's always been part of my identity that I've dealt with. I think I've had a little bit of a less struggle with it because luckily my white parent is pretty down, and I don't think a lot of other mixed kids have that reinforcement, you know.
Mhm.
My dad was an anti-racist, not a not racist. He was in the ARA, beating Nazis out in the street
Yeah.
before he met my mom and had 3 black kids. You know, he was always like that. But I don't think that a lot of other mixed people have that type of support and reinforcement from an anti-black white parent, or from a not anti-black white parent is what I mean. And so if you are mixed and have a white parent in the household, you probably have some internalized anti-blackness and racism, you
Mhm.
know? Because everybody thinks that just because mixed babies are born that that solves racism. No, no, no. Your cracker daddy has some internalized racism too.
Mhm.
My dad has always told me that if he steps out of line, then I need to come tell him about it so he can correct himself. You know, as a white man, he gave me the power as a black child to tell him if he had me fucked up. So sometimes we got to start doing things like that, where we unbalance hierarchies by removing them. And that's hard. That's so hard, because that also means that sometimes you have to admit that you need someone to call you out because you have tunnel vision. And this is like so hard to do.
But do more than admit that you can be called out, because I see this a lot too. If I fuck up, just let me know. And then when somebody lets them know, then all of a sudden there's a ton of excuses. They lash out and they do a lot of anti-black shit.
Yeah, or also I've had this happen to me and it was bad, and I've had that happen to me and it was bad, and I've had, like I said earlier, everybody has bad things happen to you. Unfortunately, nobody walks out of this life without scars from it. It's whether or not you try to use those to let yourself scar other people, or whether or not you reflect on that and go, I'm going to be a help, not a hindrance. And in my life, I had to decide that I was going to be a help. Is somebody playing behind you?
Yes.
Do you have anything that you want me to cover or talk about while we're still on it? Because it's been an hour, so I figure they're restless.
Yeah, it's at 50 minutes, and people might check out by now. I don't think so. I guess if you don't have anything else, then I can just give some details for people to find you.
Okay,
if I can get missing, so
y'all, I literally pretty much make my living and still professionally live by couch hopping. So let's be friends, yo. I'm not really afraid of people like that, which might be bad, but live fast and I.
Yeah, I mean, if I would, I could.
I will only stay in a house if they are a woman who is of color. So not everybody. Not everybody. I've got rules.
Not a white cis man, hey. Okay, so if you are interested in hearing more from Jordan, you can go follow her on Twitter at an awkward rambler. And you know what? I even prepared something.
Okay.
Right there. Yay.
Perfect. That's my handle for basically everything. You can find me with that on TikTok too. So
is the underscore there for your Twitter?
It might not be. I think the underscore is there for, I don't know. Let me be honest with you. I don't always keep the best track to these things.
I have it written down without one. That might be your Patreon.
That might be my, wait, no, my Patreon, wait, no, let me check, because one of us has got to know this.
Okay, I see your Twitter. There's no underscore. Welcome to Nish Commentary, everybody.
Both on Twitter. Oh yeah, it's Awkward Rambler spelled all the way out with no spaces on Twitter.
Okay. Except I screwed that up too. Let's see.
It's okay, dude.
There we go. I spell awkward wrong.
Yeah.
Okay, hold on, Suze. All right, so if you want to hear more from Jordan, you can go to their Twitter at Awkward Rambler. They also have a podcast that you can visit through their Patreon, which is Patreon/the_Rambler right there. And they have
called Rambler, and it's on all things for free, I think.
The podcast?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wait,
it's the like pictures, right?
It's doing it again. I feel like I keep talking over you because your screen keeps freezing up, so I think you pause. I'm just gonna stop.
No, I think it lags. Like it takes a minute for you to see me talking.
I felt bad. Okay, yeah, no, you can. Sorry.
It's okay. Don't feel bad because I mean, I feel bad too because I keep doing it to you too. And they also have a shop called The Cauldron and the Crown. You can visit that on Instagram, and I'll go ahead and have a few examples right here of their exquisite work. And
Yes.
yeah. All links will be down in the description as well. So yeah, thank you, Jimmy
No
Butch, for
problem.
coming on to Nish Commentary.
Yeah, no problem. It was fun. I hope that you have lots of great interviews with people.
Yeah. And if y'all want to join in the conversation, leave it in the comments. Any grievances, have them with me. All right.
They can come for me if they'd like to, but what they will find out is that I'm like not a nice person at all. So engage at your own risk, for real, for real.
Beware. All right. Till next time. Bama Pig Woman.
Yeah.